What's your most memorable Boston Marathon?
Okay, so I guess it has to be 2018. Now people go, 2018, why 2018? It rained so hard that day, and it was, Desi won the women's race, and Yuki from Japan won the men's race. Yuki was just, I call him an everyday runner, but he's run more sub 220 marathons than anyone else in the world. But he wasn't picked to be a winner that day. He's just gutted it out. And, it was cold. It was 35 degrees and it was raining, something to the effect, if you remember the movie Caddyshack, where Bill Murray's out on the course with the bishop and it's just deluging. And we're at the starting line and it's just coming down. I have never been that wet before a race ever in my life. And I've never been rained on that much in my life ever. Even in some of these, out on Winnipesaukee, you end up with these heat storms in the summer where the skies explode and, you get 2 inches of water in 10 minutes. That was like for all 26 miles.
Hello, podcast listener. If this is your first time here, welcome to the Eat Half, Walk Double podcast, coming to you from the Ascend Endurance Coaching Studios here in beautiful Stratford, New Hampshire, US of A. I'm your host, Chris Dunn. If you follow the show, thank you very much, and also welcome back. So this show chronicles my 4 decades in endurance sports as an exercise physiologist, coach, race director, and athlete, told through the stories of the important, influential, and interesting people I've met along the way. While I catch up with friends, colleagues, rivals, clients, and the occasional family member, it's my hope you'll learn a little something about health, fitness, and the secrets to living well along the way. Scott Graham is my guest this week. For runners, the most famous stretch of road in all the world is the 26.2 miles from Hopkinton to Boston, Massachusetts. Landmarks such as the Ashland Clock Tower, the Framingham Train Station, the screaming co-eds at Wellesley College, the Forever Young statue in Newton, Heartbreak Hill, Coolidge Corner, the Citgo sign, and of course, Copley Square give the route a unique character. And after running 36 consecutive Boston marathons, with number 37 coming up this April, one character, Scott Graham, knows this route better than anyone I know. He shares some of his most memorable Patriots Day experiences, as well as some valuable pearls of wisdom for anyone racing the event for the first time. Well, here he is, Scott Graham. Scott, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me here.
It's good to see you, my friend. How are you doing?
Good. I don't think I've seen you in a couple years now. It's pandemic and everything else and life in general. Just our paths haven't crossed.
No, they haven't. In fact, I was trying to figure out the last time that we did see each other in person, and I believe I actually have the event that you and I both appeared at. So let me set it up this way: not since Led Zeppelin appeared on stage at London's O2 Arena in 2007 has there been a more celebrated reunion than the Moose Mountain Runaround in Wolfboro, New Hampshire, in January of 2019. Our mutual friend Dan Coons hosted a snowshoe race there at Moose Mountain for a handful of years. And I'm wondering if you remember that day. It was there was, at least in the photo that my wife Karen took, you, myself, Haley Heinrich, Marcy Schwamm, Richie Blake, Diane Levesque, Ryan Gallagher. I think
recently.
I think Jeff Litchfield was there as well. And that, 2019 was probably, 3 or 4 years since the Granite State Snowshoe Series had kind of disbanded. And so, I hadn't raced on snowshoes in a few years. Do you remember that day?
Oh, I absolutely do. It kind of wrapped around the ski area there and all through the things. In fact, I remember, who was it? He was the coach of NHTI cross country.
Yeah, Tom Walton.
Tom Walton. He was in front of me and went off course. And I remember screaming at him to get back on course, and then he proceeded to beat me that day.
Well, that's a wonderful illustration, really, of snowshoe racing in particular, but generally of trail racing and mountain racing.
Yeah.
There's always this friendly esprit de corps, right? In other words, you notice somebody gets off course, particularly someone that's ahead of you. Now, it would be to your advantage not to say anything and let them get way off course.
But you don't do that.
But you don't do that. Now that may or may not be the case in other forms of running or racing, but generally that's snowshoe racing. I don't know. My recollection was that it hurt nearly as much as I remember it hurting years before when we were racing regularly on the snowshoe circuit.
I think it was pretty cold that day too, as I recall.
It was fun to have to be able to sort of to kind of relive those the heyday, so to speak, of New Hampshire snowshoe racing.
Oh yeah, we had a lot of fun racing in snowshoes. That's
we did, and I want to talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. But Scott, for the listener that doesn't know Scott Graham, why don't you introduce yourself?
Well, the way I usually like to put it is I'm a husband, father, grandfather now, runner, and multi-sport endurance athlete. And I put it that way because I think it's more important. The running is a side thing for me. It isn't my life. I try not to make it my life, but the family. I always tell my people who work for me, family first. And I believe that truly, because at some point in time, I'm not going to be running. If I neglect the family, I'm going to be all alone. So, it is family first. And, over the years, I've looked at it and said, every runner can do every person can do what I do. They just need a real good support system. And part of that is your family buying into it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good point. And of course, we'll talk about your athletic history and specifically the streak that you have going on. And I think as part of that discussion, obviously, it'll become clear that for you to have done what you've done and continue to do, it wouldn't be possible without the support system that you have, and of course your family is central to that. Let's before we get into that, let's talk, because it's kind of fun for me to as I reconnect with the important people and the interesting people and the influential people that I've met over the years. It's fun for me to think back to how how we came to know each other, and I'm gonna guess, although you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm gonna guess that that you and I came to know each other through what we were just talking about a moment ago, which is snowshoe racing. Is that your recollection, Scott, of how you and I came to know each other?
I had to go back and look through Facebook memories and stuff, but I believe it was Cobble Mountain Race. It was the first time you had put it on. I think it was 2008, 2009 timeframe.
Yep.
And I had a place over in Guilford at that point in time, which is right next to Gunstock Mountain, pretty much. And Dave Dunham, who's a friend of mine, suggested that I go and run this race. Okay, well, I had some snowshoes for clomping around in the snow and stuff. I thought it'd be neat, so I showed up with a pair of my Tubbs snowshoes, and I did a warm up run with Dave, and we chatted a bit, and I'm just wondering what's going to happen, and the gun goes off, and all of a sudden my heart rate goes from 0 to 300 in seconds, and I'm dying. I finish, great. And I got black and blue marks all over my ankles. and I'm looking at everyone else, including you, everyone's got these, flashy Dions on that are a lot smaller than I had. But, it's funny because just the whole environment at the snowshoe race was so much more open and, just different than a road race. People you met, like, who was it? I think her name was Short Tail. What was her first name? Lauren? I don't know. She was a good Emily Trespass, and there was Bill Morris, and all these people were just, oh yeah, great to have you here. Let's have some fun, and that's the way it was. And I think the race cost me $15 back then, which even back then that was considered very inexpensive. And you did that. You really kept the prices way down compared to road races. So
yeah, well, of course, in those early years, and the race that you're referring to, the Cobble Mountain Snowshoe Classic, I think I called it, was at Gunstock Mountain Resort, and it was the course that I had laid out was a combination of Nordic trails, the Nordic ski trails
around the Cobble Mountain.
Yeah, around Cobble Mountain, which is this this lower peak. It's a secondary peak,
right,
that happens to be sort of smack dab in the middle of the Nordic network, and which was just adjacent to the alpine ski area.
Right.
I mean, it wasn't a ski mountain. It literally it was a hill in the middle of the Nordic network that actually happened to have a snowshoe trail that tracked to the top of this Cobble Mountain and back down the other side. So, of course, I thought it would be fun. And as you recall, generally speaking, acidotic racing events always had to have some little challenging twist to them. I thought that was an important aspect of program or of course design. So combination of the nice groomed Nordic trails, and then this really nasty, snowshoe single track ascent and descent.
I think I fell 3 times coming down that mountain.
You fell 4 times because because I went back and read your blog, and well, maybe you fell 3 times the first year. You fell 4 times the second year because you actually mentioned it in your blog in year 2. So as much as that first year kind of beat you up a little bit, either you were not smart enough or you were determined enough that you came back the next year, maybe with a little bit different equipment. I'm guessing you probably had Dion's.
I had Dion's the second year. In fact, I bought Dion's right after that first attempt. I says, okay, we're not going to do this again.
And you actually very, very generously and graciously helped me that second year.
Oh, that's right. I helped you carry the podiums out. I helped you set up the course, and I remember that.
Yeah, well, and again, thanks to your blog, because I wouldn't have remembered this, but apparently I had 10 cases of Red Hook beer that I gave away that year, because you mentioned that in your blog, and then of course you helped me set up the last couple hundred meters of the course, which would end up being beneficial to you once the race started, because you knew the last couple hundred meters of the course, and kind of knew when you had to turn it on. So yeah, such good times. And you mentioned the lower entry fee. Of course, a big part of that was because snowshoe racing was somewhat in its infancy at that point here in New Hampshire. Not necessarily in New England, because the Western Mass Athletic Club had been hosting snowshoe races out in Western Mass for many, many years before we got into the sport. But in New Hampshire, it was a relatively new thing. And because it was so ridiculous, right? You put snowshoes on your feet and you run around. The entry fee, there was enough barrier to entry just because it was so ridiculous that the entry fee didn't need to be another obstacle for people to overcome. That's why we kept the entry fee low. Do you? So you mentioned Dave Dunham and Bill Morris and Emily Trespass. Did you? Do you remember recognizing anybody else from other types of racing when you showed up to that snowshoe race, or truly, Scott, was it an entirely different and new community to you?
No, there was a bunch of people I recognized from the running community. Dan Varrington would show up to races, and Jeff Litchfield, like you were discussing before. I mean, there was a lot of people that I had run against or had met over the years, and it really snowshoe racing. I look at was another neat thing you could do in the winter for running. Okay, it wasn't something someone said, I think I'm going to start running and I'll start with snowshoe racing. That typically wasn't the path people took.
It's true. It's true. And I don't know about you, but when I was racing quite a bit on snowshoes, I mean, generally speaking, winter is about 13 weeks long, right? And so basically it's 13 weekends potentially during the wintertime. For me, when I was racing frequently on snowshoes, it always seemed to me like the winter went by pretty quickly. Was that your experience as well?
Well, it was, there was 5-6 races. So you're racing, in your series, you're racing every other weekend. So it was all tight, and you were praying for snow at times, or we were shoveling snow onto the course.
It's a really good point. Of course, as as runners, particularly as road runners, New England winters can be somewhat of a challenge in terms of road conditions, and it's often that quality of outdoor running begins to suffer a little bit for road runners. But snowshoe racing was, it was that opportunity to embrace the difficulty and challenges of New England winters. Because aside from having not enough snow, the challenge was there, right? Oh, yeah. And again, to me, the combination of the community of people and the number of races, it seemed like winter was much more pleasurable and tolerable.
Oh, yeah. Well, it gave you something to look forward to too. And most of the races you put on all had the word mountain in them. So it meant at some point you were running up a mountain. So there was that challenge.
It's true. It's true.
Even in the most bizarre one, which Feel Good Farm. I don't know if you remember that one.
I do. That was actually that was tough. That was a Michael Amarello production. Okay. I'm not going to take the blame or credit for that. That was Michael's race. Yeah, we Feel Good Farm in, was it Moultonborough?
No, that was
not Moultonborough. Lindenborough.
Okay, yep.
Is that right?
I don't even remember. It didn't have a lot of snow, so there was a lot of broken cleats that day.
Well, that's also the race that, it literally, Michael had the course wind through this farm, and in the areas that we were racing, there was actually some farm junk, right, that typically would have been covered in snow, wasn't covered in snow. So you really had to pay attention to what you were doing, because the last thing you wanted to do was fall on a piece of rusty, sharp farm junk that happened to be littering the course. All super, super fun memories, for sure. Well, you referenced it a little bit, but let's talk a little bit more about your athletic background and what that looked like growing up, how you got into running, because I want to get to this really interesting fact and something that I want to explore a little bit more. But this year, this April, you will run in your 37th consecutive Boston Marathon.
That's correct. Yep.
Now, for the listener, let that sink in for a moment. I'll say it again. This April, you will race your 37th consecutive Boston Marathon. An extraordinary streak that I'm sure There are any number of really interesting and funny stories associated with that, and we'll get into that. But but take us up to the start of your running passion. What was sports like for you as a kid?
Okay, so I grew up in a family of five. I was the oldest. My dad, in his prime was, baseball, basketball, football guy, captain of the team of everything. I was tiny, up until my junior year, I was 5 feet tall and 94 pounds soaking wet.
Which is kind of funny because I remember you. I know you as being what, 6 foot, 6'1", 6'2"?
Yes.
Yeah, 6'1". So you grew quite a bit.
Yeah. So, growing up, I never thought I'd be a runner. That wasn't part of the thing. Dad was baseball, basketball, football. I loved baseball and hockey. I grew up in the days of Bobby Orr and Carl Yastrzemski and Phil Esposito. So hockey was my passion, actually. But I wasn't particularly fast and I was pretty small. So going into the corner with a big guy, wasn't working real well for me. I was getting my, butt handed to me constantly in hockey. And, by the time I, hit freshman in high school, when you start trying out for the high school teams, I wasn't the guy who's going to make that team. There was no way. I was too small. Like I said, I was 94 pounds and 5 feet tall my junior year. But then, let's see. Actually, I probably would have gone out for running my sophomore year because I did realize my freshman year, I'll back up just a little bit. My freshman year, there was a walkathon in town and, raise money. And I don't remember what it was for, but it was 25 miles long. Guess who finished first in that walkathon? Me, because I ran most of it. And it just, it was what I did, running. And how did I get to that running point? Well, it's funny because a friend of mine, Michael Boucher, him and I used to play hockey together. And his dad, during the summer, would take us out for a 1.5-mile loop of the neighborhood after he'd finished his 10-mile run. This guy, Rod Boucher, was a big runner in town. And, me and Mike would go out there and we'd run around the block with him. And, mile and a half, we'd get in shape for hockey. So we were fast and had the endurance. And we had the endurance. We just, neither one of us were particularly fast. But anyways, so come my junior year, I decided cross country sounds like a lot of fun. Let's give it a try. And I was the new guy on the team because everyone else had been on the team for two plus years already. So, I was JV and that was fine. And, I got my big opportunity to run varsity towards the end of the season and I screwed up. I tried going out with the fast guys and you know how that happens. You think you got it and all of a sudden it all falls apart fast and the world gets real woozy on you. So but that was my start of running. And then I, ran winter and spring track. We had my coach back then, Jim Dirk, and he was also a marathoner. Oh, my friend's father, Rod Boucher, he was a marathoner too at Run Boston. So, it piqued my interest early on as to what this Boston Marathon was all about. And, my father would take us down to the course in Newton every now and then over the years. So I got to see it firsthand. So it was, interesting, but I really enjoyed the running part, up through my senior year in high school. Great. College, though, I realized once again, I'm not material to run at that level. You always hit these things in your life where you go, okay, I've reached my plateau. That's it. So college, I didn't do a thing really.
And where did you go to college, Scott?
I went to UMass Lowell.
Okay.
Or whatever they're calling it these days, Lowell Tech. I mean, when I first started, it was Lowell Tech. Lowell State was actually two different colleges. So, I graduated from U Lowell when the mascot was the Indians or the Chiefs, rather. We don't.
That was a long time ago.
A long time ago, but it was good. And a year or so after I graduated, my wife had already my girlfriend at the time graduated, and I decided right when we get married, I needed a hobby, and my buddy and I decided to start running together because it was something we did early on in our lives, and just started entering 5Ks and not 5Ks, 5 milers. 5Ks didn't exist back then.
Mm.
You had if you ran the 5K, that was the JV race back then, and it was 5 milers or higher. And that's all that existed. It was a lot of fun, and most of them were sponsored by pubs in the area. So whatever.
Right. Not a bad thing at all.
Right.
So there was tell me about this 4th of July race in Chelmsford. What's the significance of that race?
Okay, so Chelmsford always had this 4th of July race, and to many of the people out of Chelmsford in that area know it quite well as the John Carson 4th of July race. Back then, it was usually just a bunch of local runners. This is back in '85 or so. Bunch of local runners, and maybe the high school studs would run it. And they'd get 200 plus runners. So here I am. It's a point-to-point race from one part of town to the other along the parade route. So you had lots of people out there getting ready for the parade. In fact, Chelmsford is notorious for people setting up their chairs for the parade 1 week in advance. So, and they chain them to, telephone poles. It's pretty funny, but they had to get their spot. So anyways, I get in this race and go out like lightning. And I did pretty well. I think I finished 5th that day. And I got back to my wife after the race, and she's standing there with this guy, and she introduces me to him. I think his name was Kevin Crispel. And he introduced himself as part of the Greater Lowell Roadrunners, and wanted to know, geez, do I belong to a club? Because they were always out on the prowl to find new talent and stuff. And I didn't think I really wanted to belong to a club at that point in time. And he talked about it and said, "Tell you what, why don't you show up to this grab bag race at the this little pub they had in Lowell, and just meet the people and see if you like the group or not." So I showed up, and sure enough, I had a ball at the race. I mean, I didn't do particularly well, probably, in the top 20 or so, because I was running against a lot of, what I call real runners at that point. And then, once again, it was at a pub. So they convinced me over a few cold beverages that it was a good idea to join the club. And, it was I look at it back and say Greater Lowell taught me an awful lot about running. It isn't just about, running the race. It's about how to train, how to rest, how to have fun. I mean, if you're not having fun, you're not going to do it long. And that they taught me how to really have fun with the running. And, I really look back saying that was probably one of my best decisions ever, joining them as a runner, because I wouldn't be where I am today if I hadn't done that.
Yeah. You mentioned that, it was the Greater Lowell Road Runners that really elevated you as a runner, really sort of helped you to become more focused, more serious, more invested in the sport of running. And you also had some mentors along the way as part of that club. Do any names come to mind, Scott, when you think about the important people in that club that really helped to shape you as a runner?
Sure. I mean, one of the guys who was he was head of the racing team for years, Dave Camere, was pretty instrumental. He was one of the founders of the club, and he was like the ringleader to get people out on long runs and stuff. Dave was a very good runner in his prime. He also started the Wang Running Club when Wang was big, and in fact, their first buses to the marathon were a combination Greater Lowell Road Runners Wang team. So they get 2-3 buses that would meet down at the Wang Towers there in Lowell. Other people like Will Mason, who's departed at this point, and he was an amazing athlete. Will, he was still running, better than 250 at 60 years old in a marathon. So he was an amazing runner. Colin Goulson, Tom Amiro, Tom Carroll, Stada Mahaldo. And there were women runners, Lisa Senatori, Cara Haas. Kara's younger than me, but she is something else without a doubt. And I know you know Kara well. But there was just a lot of people there who could take me under their wing and teach me. All these guys were older than I was, but they were great people, great mentors to have. And to tell you how good they were, there was one year where Greater Lowell Masters team won the Masters division in the Boston Marathon.
Wow.
They also won the Open division.
Wow.
They were insane how fast they were.
Wow. Yeah. And that your experience with the Greater Lowell Roadrunners, I think is an excellent illustration of the benefit of a local running club. And more importantly than the club, the local running community, to not only to have the chance to go on group runs and to share that experience together, but also as an opportunity to learn and to grow as an athlete within that sport, as a result of the mentors, in that particular club. So I mentioned earlier that you've run the Boston Marathon for 36 consecutive years. Once again, this April will be your 37th. So what's the story of how you came to run your first Boston Marathon? I mean, so you talked about local 4-milers and 5-milers, and I'm sure there was this progression, in distance. But what? So how did you come to run your first Boston Marathon?
It's I look at it as a funny story because it wasn't the Greater Lowell Roadrunners. I was working at a company named MassComp in Westford, Mass. At the time, high tech. They were one of the original Unix companies, developing the operating system and stuff. And they had put in a small workout room, and a group of us used to get together and run all the time. And there was this one gentleman, Mike Chisholm. Mike was he was a lineman for U Lowell at one point in time. So he's a big build guy. We used to jokingly say he ran like a cement mixer, right? He put it in cement mixer mode and he wouldn't stop. He was just tough as nails, absolutely. And one of the nicest guys you ever meet. And one run he was talking about that he had run the Boston Marathon. And I'm looking at him going, get out of here. You ran the Boston, I was in disbelief, but, sure enough, he had, and he had a connection and was able to get me entered. Great. And I was in pretty good shape back then. I weighed nothing. I had ballooned up to 6'1", and I was now 160 pounds of muscle, and there wasn't any fat on me. And great. This sounds like a good idea. We could do this. And he also connected me with the Winner's Circle at that point in time, had a bus, and they would stop in Lowell to pick up a group of us. And this group was, Mike, another guy, Steve Doyle, and Billy Florence, and Rick McCarthy, who were all football players, but were all tough as nails. And they Winner's Circle brought us into Boston or into Hopkinton and basically parked at the Common. Here we are in this nice luxury bus, and most of the other runners back then were, they were stuck up in the gym at the high school or just sitting around the Common on the wet grass. So we're in this luxury bus, and this is what teams did back then. They'd be able to park right there. No big deal. Nobody bothered you, and it was all good. There was probably 7,000 or so people there. So that's how I got into it. I mean, somebody that I would never expect could run a marathon taught me that I could run a marathon.
And more importantly, got you a bib.
Yep, right.
Yeah.
He got me my first bib in.
So anyone that's familiar with the Boston Marathon course knows that the first 10K or so are downhill. For first-time Boston marathoners, it's not hard to get caught up in the excitement of the Boston Marathon. Couple that with the fact that it's downhill for the first 10K, and more than a few first-time Boston marathoners have got themselves in a bind after the first 10K of maybe having gone out a little too hard, because the race sort of from that point on progressively gets more difficult. What was your race experience, Scott, at that first Boston Marathon?
I ran a 10K, a fast 10K, as a matter of fact. Yeah. I mean, going into that race, I didn't do any marathon specific training. I didn't know anything about the marathon other than it was long ways. And, I went out like it was a 10K, and I probably ran, I don't have my notes on this, but I probably ran a 34 to 35 minute first 10K. It's downhill, right? What's so hard about I'm saying to myself, what's so hard about this race? I knew about the hills. At least what they talked about back then was, it didn't start till mile 17 and a half when you take the corner at the fire station. I hit mile 16 and I was a mess already. And, you come down that steep hill in Wellesley down to what we used to call the Grossman Hill, because there used to be a Grossman's hardware store at the bottom of that thing. And it's a real steep downhill. In fact, it's one of the steeper downhills in the course. And if you let yourself fly down there, you're going to destroy your legs coming down there, because the pounding's vicious. And nobody talks about that little hill starting at mile 16 that goes up over the highway, up over Route 128. And that's really the first of the Newton Hills. And people are finally starting to recognize that as, okay, you've got to prepare yourself for that, because especially if it's a windy day, you're exposed. I mean, there's nothing to stop the wind, and it's a long hill. Well, by mile 16 that day, I was a mess, absolute mess. I was cramping up, didn't know anything about hydration. Heck, my legs were viciously cramping. And, it was one of those, every 10 steps, I, stop and scream in pain. And it was a real struggle to get to the finish line that day. I ended up running like a 3:19, and, which is respectable, but it wasn't what I expected. I'm thinking sub 3 should be easy for this course. I'm a good runner. I can do that. But no, I mean, it was a tough day. In fact, it was so tough. I remember I was sitting in on Boylston Street after the finish line, not a couple hundred yards down the street, and my wife and mother were standing over me. I was mentally and physically broken. Through tears, I told them, never, ever let me do something that stupid to myself ever again. And, basically I had them both, my arms over their shoulders trying to carry me back to the car. And, they had stood at the finish line, God bless them, for hours and hours and hours, because you had to get there early and you couldn't leave your spot. So they stood there for probably 6 to 8 hours, just waiting for some old guy to limp down Boylston Street.
And you actually had to take a couple days off from work. You were so sore.
Yeah, I took a couple days off from work. I couldn't walk. I literally had, part of my problem is I dehydrate easily. And I found that I can lose up to 20 pounds in a marathon.
Wow.
Just water weight. So everything cramps at that point. So I wasn't able to walk, get in a car, drive, anything.
So as the expression goes, time heals all wounds, right? Yes. So when did you know, or when did you decide that you would run your second Boston Marathon?
Physically it took me a couple weeks to get better. Then maybe 3 or 4 months later, I'm thinking, what did I do wrong? Start, using my analytical side to start sorting out, okay, I didn't do a lot of 20-mile training runs. I didn't do my hydration strategy was wrong. My pacing was wrong. It took 3 or 4 months before I started talking to my buddy again, Mike, and saying, okay, let's try this again. And let's really, I'm going to get with the great little road runners and start eking out their knowledge and start doing those 20-mile runs on Saturdays, every week for, 12, 16 weeks leading up. and that changed things a bit for me, without a doubt.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about that second year, and how the experience was different for you that second time around.
Well, the second time around, because I did a lot more of those long training runs. I mean, Boston especially is about, or any marathon, is time on your feet training. And you've run a marathons before, so you know it's not about speed work. It's about time on your feet and getting used to your body being tired and continue to push. It's mind over the body, and it's proper training, it's nutrition, it's you know fluids, everything else. But all the training I put me in a much better place. Did I do a lot better? Yeah, I think I was about 15 minutes faster, but still it wasn't a breakout year for me, without a doubt. But I was 305 range, which was a real qualifier for the race, so it set me up for the next year. And that was always the key, getting that qualifier for the next year.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Well, and that's a really good point. So, did you qualify for that second year because of that first year finish,
No.
or did you? So how did you get a bib that second year? Because again, as people that are familiar with the Boston Marathon understand that there are qualifying standards. I mean, you just can't go on a website and register for the race. I mean, you have to qualify for the race, or you have to join a charity team to raise money for a nonprofit, or you gotta know someone. You gotta be connected in order to get a bib. So how did you get a bib year two?
Year two, I was connected to this friend, Mike Chisholm. He was good friends with the guy who was in charge of the insurance commission in Massachusetts. And John Hancock is a big insurance company. And so this gentleman in the insurance commission just tapped John Hancock on the shoulder and said, "I need a couple bibs," and they appeared.
Awesome.
And there's a lot of ways to get in, as you explained and stuff. And I look at the charity runners and marvel personally, because not only are they doing all the training, but they are raising huge amounts of money, and that would scare me more than the training. Having to, my son ran last year as a charity runner, and he had to raise $12,000.
Wow.
I was more worried about that than him training, because I knew he could do the training.
No, for sure.
Tough kid, but $12,000 as a young father, I went, "Oh my God, how are you going to do this?"
Yeah, for sure. And of course those folks that participate as charity runners, oftentimes they participate multiple years, year over year, and no question that the fundraising for 1 year would be daunting, but to sort of to tap into your personal contacts again that next year and ask for donations, yes, becomes increasingly difficult. So year two, you're on a qualifying time.
Right.
And so therefore, you're into the event, year three. When did this become a streak? I mean, maybe obviously year two, it was a streak, but when in your mind, did this, I'll say passion for the Boston Marathon develop, but other people might describe it as an obsession with the Boston Marathon. But Scott, when did this become a streak?
I think it became a streak somewhere around, oh God, probably, I think it was number 17 or so. I think it was 2004 where it became a obsession. And let me tell you why. Because I knew I was totally hooked that year, because 2004, it started to hit 90 degrees on the course. And I was, damn the torpedoes. I had trained to go sub 3. I'm going sub 3 today. I hit mile 17 and a half at the corner of the fire station. I was completely depleted. I was in bad shape. Knew I needed electrolytes. So I went over to the medical tent that was there, and said, I need electrolytes. Do you got some Gatorade or something like that, some salt tablets or whatever I can, pop? And they said, why don't you come in and we'll check you out? And I went, and I said, remember saying to the lady, I know how this game works. If I walk in there, you're ripping my bib off. I said, that's not happening. So, they got me the electrolytes and I continued on. I think I got to about mile 18 and a friend of mine, Roger Nasaka, pulls up alongside me. And I'm looking at him and he goes, hey, Scotty, how you doing? I go, horrible. And then I was like, what are you doing here? This guy was a 2:30 marathoner. He goes, same thing as you, Scotty, just trying to survive. We were literally taking steps that were no longer than 6 inches apiece, right? And we helped each other finish. We finished, he went left, I went right, and we both ended up, losing what was in our stomach. And it was just, it was bad. But I knew at that point I was definitely sadly hooked forever, and I had to make it to 25.
Yeah, well, so that story raises a good point, because for clarification, this is a Boston Marathon finish streak, not a Boston Marathon start streak, correct?
Oh yes, finishing is part of it. You have to finish. Yes.
Yeah, in order for it to quote unquote count in terms of the streak. So you're describing year 17 or so, and battling through those incredibly challenging conditions. When did you get connected, or when did you discover that there was this streaker club, like that you weren't the only one, that there were other people out there doing it? And I'm sure at that point, the point at which you realized that there were sort of active streak records at that time. You'll tell me there probably were people that easily had been doing it for 30 years, maybe some even 40 years. When did it become obvious to you, or when did you learn that there was this group of people who were streaking the Boston Marathon?
It was probably around 2000, I think, is when the Quarter Century Club got started. And so I had realized it at that point, and, started looking at, I figured at that point I'm around 15 or so in, going, hey, maybe I can make it to this thing. And, it was just year in, year out, get yourself in shape. And, I always looked at it too as a way to stay in shape over the winter months, right? Because you had something to focus on. I am very goal oriented, and having that out there in April meant that you had to do the work in December, January, February, the worst months of the year. And, the streak, I look at some of the people who've done that, and I have the records of all the streakers. I helped put it together. Last year, we actually pulled all the records from every single runner who's done 25 or more and put it into one master spreadsheet. And some of these guys are incredible. Where, these aren't your, weekend job warriors. A lot of these guys are the people who could run 2:20 and 2:30 marathons when in their prime and stuff. In fact, a funny story, years ago when I was first in the Quarter Century Club, we always meet the Saturday before the marathon at the expo, and we'll go off in a corner and meet and have a little meeting. They have a team bus that brings them to the race. They have a pasta dinner Saturday night, all kinds of little activities, nothing huge. But I'm standing there with a bunch of people, and somebody came over to me and was asking what was going on. I says, oh, these are the Quarter Century Club people. They've all run 25 or more consecutive Boston marathons and stuff. And the guy says, oh, what kinds of times are they running today? I says, well, some of these guys are in their 60s and stuff, so it's 4 or 5 hours. But they're keeping going, they're keeping active and stuff, and that's the important part. And he kind of chuckled, like, 4 or 5 hours. What's that? What kind of run is that? And I noticed that. I says, well, what'd you run for a time to qualify? He said, oh, I ran a 3:05. And I laughed. I said, most of these guys are 2:30 guys in their prime, so be careful what you laugh at, son.
Yeah, it's good. Really good point. it sort of help to put it into context a little bit. What are we talking about in terms of numbers of athletes in that quarter century club? Are we talking a dozen people? Are we talking a couple dozen people? Help us to understand how many streakers are there out there for the Boston Marathon?
Active streakers 99.
Wow.
Retired streakers, people who've ended their streak 83.
Wow. Okay. So of the list that you are referencing, what's the longest current active streak? Do you have that number?
Sure do. It is 53.
53 years?
Yes.
And do you have the name of that individual?
Mark Bauman from Kentucky.
Okay, Mark Bauman from Kentucky.
Oh, no, I take that back. Flushing, Minnesota.
Okay. Okay.
I don't know why it says KY. He has two different designations on his name here.
Even more impressive. 53 years is the longest active Boston Marathon finish streak.
Yep.
53 years.
Now, the person who's in second place, interestingly, is Dave McGilvery.
Dave McGilvery?
Yeah, the race director. Now, you may know this, but he these days, he actually goes and runs the race after the race is done. He'll go back at night with a group of friends and run the course.
Yeah. How about that? So McGilvery was racing the Boston Marathon before he took over the Boston Marathon as race organizer. And of course, not to want his streak to end, he still ran the race. He ran it after the race was over.
Yeah. And he'll tell the story that his first attempt, he failed. He dropped out. He was 17 years old. I think he was a bandit that day, but he thought he could just show up and run like all young people when they first run the race. And now he found out he couldn't do that.
Pretty extraordinary. So, so at this point, is there any special privilege that is granted to streakers in terms of getting bibs, or do you still need to technically qualify? How does that work?
Yeah, so once you hit 25 years of qualifying, the BAA says, okay, you've proved you can do it. So they give us a pass, but it's with a stipulation. You have to finish within the time limit that the BAA sets. And what they do is, if you don't have a qualifier, they put you in Wave 2, Corral 8, which is the last corral in Wave 2. Then what they say is, okay, you have to finish within 6 hours of the last person crossing the starting line from Wave 4. So you get 6 hours and 50 minutes, maybe, is what you end up getting, which is still, as you get older, it gets harder. I mean, it's kind of funny. Every year we lose a couple people because they don't make that time. I mean, they're getting up. A lot of people are getting in their 70s and what have you, and we also get usually a note from somebody every year, one or two people that cash it in, saying I can't toe the line this year. I'm ending my streak, and it's always a sad letter. At some point everyone's going to have to do this, and so it's what it is. But what is the BAA lets us do that, and they're a great group of people, the BAA, and they have rules and they hold to them, and I understand it. And but then, like I said, there is a bus that they provide just the Quarter Century Club members to go from Boston to Hopkinton. It's a special bus that's organized by the group, and that's really the only two things we get from the BAA. And it's enough for us.
Oh, well, I mean, look, the Boston Marathon is a popular enough event that they don't have to they don't have to grant anybody special privileges with respect to the race. However, clearly they recognize the loyalty, the perseverance of folks like yourself and others, who have sort of almost made this lifelong commitment, if you will, to the race. So it's cool that they recognize it, and it's really cool that they provide some special privileges. Well, you sort of you mentioned and alluded to some of the reasons that folks might need to end their streak. And we'll talk about some of the adversity that you've faced along the way, because I'm sure there were years where maybe through chewing gum and chicken wire you patch things together enough to get across the finish line. But there have been some extraordinary challenges along the way. Not the least of which, of course, is April 15th of 2013, when two terrorists planted 2 homemade pressure cooker bombs near the finish line. Those bombs detonated, approximately 14 seconds and about 200 meters apart. 3 spectators died: Martin, Richard, Lingzing Liu, and Crystal Campbell. Scott, you were there at that 2013 Boston Marathon. Tell your story of that day.
Okay, so at that point in time, my son, he was attending Wentworth College, which is down in the Fenway area. So he was a spectator. Okay. I had started in wave 1 back then, and I don't remember exactly what I ran that day, but I know the clock read 4:10 when the bombs went off. But that was based on the second or third wave. So I know that I had finished almost an hour and a half prior to the bombs. So I was pretty much out of the area. I was down at the Park Plaza Hotel, which is 3-4 blocks down the street from the finish line. I'd run okay that day, and my wife knew my son was down there, and nothing had happened at that point. I had gotten back to the hotel, showered up, was doing okay. But then I realized I needed to use the bathroom, and I couldn't use the team bathrooms because people were showering in there. So I said, let's go down to the hotel lobby to use the bathroom down there. And I did, took care of my business, went back to get in the elevator and noticed there was a line of a couple hundred people to get on the elevators. And I knew, the team room was up in the 6th floor, and we had 2 or 3 team rooms. So I heard someone say, hey, the hotel service elevator is available for runners. Okay, good enough. I got on the hotel service elevator, and all of a sudden the world started getting real woozy on me. I was dehydrated once again. By the 4th floor, I realized I was about to pass out. So I hit the stop button and opened the doors, and I fell out of the elevator into the hotel service area, and I'm on the floor. And, I'm sweat's pouring out of me. I'm dehydrated and, quivering, and, they're looking for a doctor, and I'm there. No, just give me water. I'll be fine. Water. After about 10 minutes, they got me water, and I said, okay, I got to get up to the team room. And I looked at the elevator and says, you know what? I only got 2 more flights to go. I'll just take the stairs because I don't know what this elevator is going to do to me. I get up there, and the people at Greater Lowell, they do a good job of watching out for the runners and stuff, but they said, Scott, you need to go down and get an IV, back down in the finish area and get some IVs. And I kind of shook them off, and okay, good enough. They appeased me. I was sitting out in the hallway, and all of a sudden somebody comes out and says, okay, we got a problem here. Something's going on down at the finish line. And they looked at me and says, Scott, even if you wanted, you can't get down there now. Something really bad's happening. And so I had a couple other friends, and we always ditch a car. Me and my buddies ditch a car at the parking garage above Maggiano's, which is across the street, on Sunday night, so we can get out of there. We don't have to wait till the last person finishes for Greater Lowell. So we decided, I tell my friends, we got to get out of here, or this city's going to go gridlock, right? We already realized that our cell phones were shut down. So we get out of there, and I jump into the driver's seat. And my buddy looks at me, goes, this guy, Peter Floss, he looks at me going, hold on, you just passed out. you're not driving. It's a good point. So he starts driving, and the other person I have with us was a woman named Jill Trotter, who's a very good runner. And our phones weren't working, but we could see Facebook was working and stuff. And, the city was becoming really locked down quick. We got over the Zachem Bridge, and just on the outskirts of Boston, all of a sudden our phones exploded with text messages coming in from all over the place. People, concerned and stuff. And, all of a sudden my Jill's phone rings, and it's my youngest daughter screaming, crying, trying to find me because she didn't know where I was. And, and then my wife, she's panicking because my son was down in the area. Little did she know that he had saw me go by, went back to school. He realized what was going on. He ran back to the Park Plaza Hotel to find me. So he was in the area, just trying to find it. But it was between, text messages and Facebook, we were able to communicate to everybody what was going on. But it was pretty scary. And my office back then was 2 blocks away from the finish line. So we couldn't go in the office for a couple weeks because they were trying to collect every ounce of evidence, anything that was around there. And that was a long process. So
do you remember or recollect if there were any members of the Greater Lowell Road Runners that were more directly involved, that were near the finish area at that time?
No, there was nobody really near the finish area. A lot of people got stopped out on Com Ave from Greater Lowell. So it was, Com Ave, you got stopped and you were a mile or so away, and they ended up, just coming around Com Ave all the way down to Arlington Street and then getting the Park Plaza Hotel, because obviously Boylston Street was totally blocked off and stuff. But no, none of the Greater Lowell people were in the area that I recall.
Yeah. So what did the BAA do for those streakers who actually didn't log an official finish because they were stopped? And the race was terminated. It was halted there at that time. What happened to those? What happened to those streakers?
Yep, there was a definite positive response from the BAA. They took the persons where they ended up being stopped, or their last checkpoint, and extrapolate their time to the finish with a 5% decline in speed over that. So if you were at the 30K mark, 18.6 miles, they'd say, okay, based on that, you would have finished in 5.5 hours. You're good. So they did that. In fact, I don't think there was anybody that got bumped from the Quarter Century Club because of the going ons of the bombings.
So 2014, you'd return to the race. Did it feel different? Was there a different emotion? Was there a different vibe coming back that next year after everything that had happened?
Absolutely different vibe. It was almost a defiant vibe. Like, we're not going to let people take this away from us. Two rogue people are not going to change what hundreds of thousands and millions of people do on their daily basis. And it was, anybody and everyone who had run the Boston Marathon prior wanted to be there for that race. I think the numbers, they bumped up that year a bit, but it was definitely a mood where people were like, we're going back. We're not going to let this change things for us. That's for certain.
I can only imagine how emotional it must have been for everyone, but particularly for folks that had been there the year before, and more specifically for folks so who call Boston home, right? Or second home. So in 2020, the Boston Marathon was held virtually because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But you kept your streak alive. Tell us the story of of your virtual Boston Marathon finish in 2020.
Okay, so the BAA decided in 2020. The race was scheduled for April 20th. I think they made the call in January saying it's not happening, or maybe it wasn't that soon. It was probably in March, April timeframe where they said, that's it. We can't do this. The pandemic's happening. It's not going to happen. Well, so I kind of took myself and said, okay, good enough. I was staying up in my place in Moultonboro, New Hampshire, and me and a bunch of friends up in Moultonboro had decided, let's run every road in Moultonboro, New Hampshire. Great. A bunch of teachers, the principal of the academy, Moultonboro Academy guy named Andy Coppinger was a friend. And I was talking to him one day and I says, I got to keep this streak going. I said, you mind if I use your track on April 20th? He goes, well, we're not in classes, so it shouldn't cause any problems. I said, okay. And he says, what do you have in mind? I says, I'm going to run a marathon. He goes, on a track? I go, it's only 106 laps. Actually, it's 105 and a half, but we'll make it 106 just to make sure that, I appease all the running gods, making sure I go the full distance. So I showed up there probably, I think it was like 5 a.m. in the morning, and set up my lawn chair at the starting line, a cooler, and started running. About 6 a.m., another set of friends, Justin and Jen Chapman, who were teachers in town, and their daughter, Ada, who's actually a very aspiring runner and cross-country skier up in New Hampshire these days, they showed up. And they set signs up around the track. And I was already like 10 miles in, but they had all the signs for the different towns. So as I reach a mile marker, the town would change. They'd change the sign. So it was pretty funny. And round and round I go. By the time I finished, then more and more people were showing up. I had only told Andy that I was doing this, but he had told, 2 friends who told 2 friends. And all of a sudden I got a crowd of, 30 plus people there. Cale Poland showed up because Cale lives in Moultonboro, and Cale, he's a big endurance nut, and he had his shirt on saying something like "fat strong," and my nickname's Fat, which means pain, heavy at times. So round and round I went, and I ended up covering the thing in 4 hours and 16 minutes, and it was pretty funny because they set up a Citgo sign. Every time I go around, they'd be ringing bells and stuff. And in fact, Justin Chapman, he was teaching a class. He had tethered his laptop to his PC and was teaching a class for Center Heart. What town is he teaching? Sandwich, I guess it is. So it was pretty funny. It was a very celebratory environment, but it worked out. And I was amazed that the people showed up to see an old guy limp around a track.
Well, pretty extraordinary. So upon reflection, what's more difficult, 26.2 miles around a 400-meter track or 26.2 miles on the Boston Marathon course?
The Boston Marathon course, without a doubt.
Okay.
So I've done actually 2 more of those virtual marathons on the track. BAA announced that, instead of holding the 2020 race, everyone's going to go virtual, and you're going to do it. You have 1 week to do it between Labor Day and the following weekend. So September 5th, I went down the Moultonboro Academy track again, set up my chair and thing, and round I went.
And that was 2021, the next year.
No, that was 2020. 2021, April 19th, I did it yet again because the BAA postponed the race again.
That's right. So yeah. So in 2021, because the pandemic was still a thing, early in 2021, the BAA announced that the race was just not going to happen on Patriots Day, 2021. So their fallback plan was October.
Columbus
Right.
Day
So
weekend.
the race was going to be held in October of 2021. I believe that the first time that the race would ever be held in the fall.
That's correct. Yep.
Correct.
Yep.
So did you race the Boston Marathon that fall? No, you did it virtually again?
No. What happened was I did run it in the October race, but April 19th, which was the day it was supposed to happen in 2021, I went to the track at Westford Academy in Westford, Massachusetts. And ran around the track and had a bunch of friends show up again.
Got it. So you didn't technically need to do that because you were going to be racing the actual Boston Marathon later that fall. So why go back and run 106 laps on a track again?
Just it's April. It's Patriots Day. It's the day I run a marathon, and so I wanted to be true to the streak, and that's the way I handled it.
That's pretty funny. Well, similar question with regard to how the BAA handled the truncated 2013 Boston Marathon. How did the BAA handle the virtual year? How did they verify or authenticate that people had run the race virtually so as to keep their Boston Marathon streaks alive?
Yeah, most people have Garmin watches or some form of GPS watches. So a lot of people were able to submit their Garmin or their Strava tracks to prove that they did this. And there's Strava or Garmin or whoever it is, there's always a leakage in GPS tracking. And that's why I actually made sure I went 106 laps versus 105 and a half.
Right.
But every time I did on a track, my watch ended up saying I did 27.2 miles, an extra mile, but I know in reality, and it always shows me all over the track. When I stayed in lane 1, I was not going to run a step further than I needed to. And so, most people ended up probably doing a little further than a 26.2 just to make sure people know that you lose distance with a Garmin. So
yeah. Well, I mean, with any GPS device, the user has the opportunity to set up the battery life of the device based on the types of activities that they do. And of course, there's always a trade-off, right? As you increase the battery life of your device, you decrease the accuracy,
right? Exactly,
because you're decreasing the. I mean, I don't know the technical elements of it, but I think essentially you decrease the number of pings the device sends off of the satellite. So there always is that trade-off, of course. At this point, Scott, is running the Boston Marathon for you? Is it more about the streak? Is it about the race performance, or is it just about the experience now? What is it about it?
Yeah. In my earlier days, I always had, lofty aspirations of speed and stuff like that. It's no longer one of the aspirations. It's the experience. It is the streak. Obviously, there's a certain pride that goes along with having that streak. And, I've been very lucky to never be seriously injured towing the line. Thank God that's never happened. I've showed up dinged up, pulled hamstring muscles, maybe a slight fever, weather conditions not so good. I mean, but as you know, any endurance sport, there's a lot of willpower of your mind that gets you through it. The training's obviously helps you, but it's the mind that you have to train more than anything else in the long run. So it's, the experience. I mean, there's nothing like coming down Boylston Street and your ears ringing. Of course, there is one place that's a little louder on the course with not quite as many people, and that's Wellesley. And it's always funny because you always get alongside somebody who, at like 11 and a half, 12 miles going, what the hell's that noise? And you'll just chuckle and say, those are the co-eds at Wellesley College. And you'll go through there and your ears are absolutely ringing. And, these days they keep all the girls to the right side of you, behind barriers. Back in the 80s, they formed a gauntlet. You could fit no more than 2 people through this thing at any one time, and they were right in your face. And, it's just high-pitched teenage girls screaming. Just, everyone who felt bad at that point was all perked up. And if you were by one of the first women, it was even louder.
Yeah. And I've heard other runners use that very same description about their ears ringing as they travel through that part of the course. So what, again, 37th year coming up this April, and we're taping the show in early February. The show will be released probably sometime in late March, early April. And for most folks who have the Boston Marathon on their schedule, traditional, as you pointed out earlier, traditional Boston Marathon training programs sort of kick off mid-December, right? And so by this point, most folks who have traditionally been training for the Boston Marathon have been training for 6, 7, 8 weeks by now, right? So again, we're taping the show in early February for a late March, early April release. 37th year now. What does your training look like now, Scott? Talk a little bit about how you prepare for the Boston Marathon now.
Well, it isn't quite the number of miles. I won't hit 100-mile weeks anymore. I mean, if I hit a 50-mile week, that's huge for me these days. I've been kind of doing a lot more long hiking, doing the New Hampshire 48, over and over again. And, doing some long runs. Now, a long run to me is 13 miles. My body just won't hold up to 20 milers that often anymore. I'll try and get one in a year, but 13 is about as far as I'll go on any given Sunday. And it's always with friends. I mean, it's, as you know, you're more likely to show up to a workout if you have other people you're meeting there, because you don't want to disappoint them. You made a commitment and you want to show up because you don't want to disappoint those people. And, it makes the hours go by too. And it's a lot more fun being around other people. And, one thing I've learned about racing over the years, in my early years was about winning things. Then, over the years now it's more, I found that what I enjoy most about running is the training and being with other people and, continuing to push yourself, but just getting out there and being with other people. It isn't about beating other people. You're competing against yourself and at the age you are at that point in your life. So it's a different mentality without a doubt.
Yeah. Now that you are, your primary residence is in the Lakes region of New Hampshire, do you get an opportunity to train on the course any longer?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'll go out there. I kind of switch back and forth between Moultonborough, New Hampshire, and Westford, Massachusetts. More Westford than Moultonborough these days, since the pandemic ended. But Greater Lowell Road Runners has 4 to 5 runs on the course every March, depending on how many Saturdays there are in March. So they'll drop us off at the Wellesley Community Center, have us run to Heartbreak Hill, mile 21, and then back. So that's like a 12-mile run the first week. And then every week it gets a little further. And the last 1 or 2 are from Hopkinton all the way to the 21-mile mark. And they drive us down, set up, tables on the course to get you food and drink and stuff, and and help you along, get you warmer clothes, whatever you need while you're doing your training run. And, Greater Lowell's been fantastic that way. And, the last one typically is the charity run event too, where they ship all the charity runners out to the start, and they run them to mile 21. So you could have 5,000 people out on the course that day. It's amazing the number of people out there, and it's a lot of fun. It's a celebration. This is really one of the last long runs people do before the race, because it's usually 2 to 3 weeks prior, and it's a big celebration.
Yeah,
and
right.
It's a lot of fun. And I say Greater Lowell sets up tables for their runners. It's actually for any runner who needs something, and all the clubs do that. It's just we're all out there helping each other out, and it's a big celebration.
Yeah, I think for anyone outside of the area, that group run experience on the Boston Marathon course is just probably something that people don't appreciate. But to your point, it is a thing, and it's an important thing, because I know, and I've spoken to a number of first-time Boston Marathoners who find that experience of being able to get on the course for a handful of training runs, either through their charity team or through their running club. Those folks that live in the region, just the opportunity to get on the course before race day is an important thing. Well, because you have such you have such a history at that race, I want to talk about a handful of unique experiences you've had over the last 36 years. So let me ask you about those. First is, what's your most memorable Boston Marathon?
Okay, so I guess it has to be 2018. Now people go, 2018, why 2018? It rained so hard that day, and it was, Desi won the women's race, and Yuki from Japan won the men's race. Yuki was just, I call him an everyday runner, but he's run more sub 220 marathons than anyone else in the world. But he wasn't picked to be a winner that day. He's just gutted it out. And, it was cold. It was 35 degrees, and it was raining, something to the effect, if you remember the movie Caddyshack, where Bill Murray's out on the course with the bishop, and it's just deluging. And we're at the starting line, and it's just coming down. I have never been that wet before a race ever in my life, and I've never been rained on that much in my life ever. Even in some of these, out on Winnipesaukee, you end up with these heat storms in the summer where the skies explode, and you get 2 inches of water in 10 minutes. That was like for all 26 miles, and it was cold and wet, and that's the worst. As you know, that's the worst weather to run in, because you're 35 degrees and soaking wet. You're not going to get warm. It doesn't matter what you do. And in fact, my Garmin watch, they had a glitch in the watches. When they got to a certain temperature level in the cold, they would shut down. Mine shut down at like mile 22 that day, which I'm looking at, I said, son of a gun, my watch shut down. And other people were saying the same thing, that their Garmin watch, they fixed that glitch, thank God. But it was just so wet. People were just laughing at the starting line going, it can't be any worse than this. Now, one of the things that kind of helped, though, was all those Saturday training runs I talked about. We either got rained on or snowed on almost 5 weeks in a row leading up to that year. So us New Englanders, we were pretty used to it. People outside the region, though, there was a high dropout rate that year for people outside. And, a funny story, because Dave McGilvery's a friend of mine. He told me they ran into another unforeseen problem that they had to address years after, just to make sure it doesn't happen again. In the medical tents, they were handing out the heat shield blankets during the race. So people were running with those on to try and keep some of the wetness off of them and, keep some body temperature in. Well, people were ditching them on Hereford Street. Those things are like ice when they're wet. So you get to Hereford Street, they were covered with these blankets, and people were falling down because they were stepping on these blankets and boom, 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 boom. So now they actually post people on Hereford Street to grab Mylar blankets if they start ditching them again.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it was just so cold and wet that day, and people are just laughing. It's like, okay, time's out the window here. Let's just get through it. And most New Englanders did fine that day because they were just used to the weather.
Well, and that year, that finish was not guaranteed or given. I mean, no marathon finish is necessarily always a given, but that year in particular, hypothermia was a real consideration.
Oh,
yeah. I mean, obviously just as challenging as a 75-degree day in April in Boston can be for the marathon. Those conditions were absolutely challenging. All right. I think you might have alluded to it or mentioned it earlier, but fastest Boston Marathon.
Yeah, that was 1990. My son was just born. Leading up to that, my wife was on bed rest for most of the last 3 months. So all I had to do was train. I didn't have anything more going on than training and checking in on her and, taking care of her. And, she was a trooper, and I just was in great shape going into that race. And I ended up running a 2:46. And,
wow.
The thing is, I walked probably 3 or 4 miles of that course too. Mile 16 is my daddy. It breaks every time I hit mile 16. It's like, I don't have it. I walked a couple times, and but by mile 21, someone in the crowd had handed me a lemonade that just loaded with sugar and just revived me, and I dropped it back down into sub 6 minute pace for the last 5 miles and was able to bring it in. But that was
pretty
my
amazing.
fastest.
And you were in your late 30s, early 40s?
30s. I was in my 30s at that point in time.
Mid to late 30s.
Yeah. 1990. Right? Yeah, I was 31 actually.
Okay, early 30s. All right, my math was bad. 31, 2:46, extraordinary. All right, slowest Boston Marathon.
Yeah, that was a 4:48. That was in 2001.
That
was the fall race they had.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so I'm not a very good hot weather runner. So training in the summer months doesn't work out for me, and I just never could get a good training run in, and never, it's just age is catching up. 63 years old that year, and so yeah, it just didn't work out. Actually, 62. Yeah, it didn't work out well that day, and I was suffering the whole race.
Okay. 36 years of running the Boston Marathon, 35 years of being actually in Boston with tens of thousands of other people. During that time, because it's not uncommon, as you know, for celebrities to show up at the Boston Marathon. While you were running, did you ever have any close encounters with famous people?
More so runners who are famous than celebrities. Celebrities, not a lot of them can run a 3-hour marathon.
Okay, fair.
Okay, so typically they weren't around me at the start or, even in the finish. But because I was running, for many years, I was in the first corral of the non-elites. So I'd be up there in some of the front rows, and all the elites would come on. And you recognize them all and stuff. Uda Pippig was always a fan favorite. I don't know if you remember her, but she was always a fan favorite. And when she'd come out, everyone would go nuts. But all the winners and stuff would all be right there in front of me, and which was very. It was hard to hold yourself back at the gun, but you knew you had to. You couldn't go out with them because they're running at a much different level than everyone I was standing around. In the 100th Boston, for about 5 or 6 miles, I ran with Bill Rogers. He was he actually had a cell phone taped to his arm and was doing interviews during the race. It was kind of funny because he looks at me going, Scotty, this is tough. I can't, I can hardly hear the questions these people are asking because I'd go by a crowd and they'd be screaming for me and I can't hear a thing. So, it was basically all runners were the celebrities that I'd end up running into during the course of the races.
Very cool. Well, Boston Billy, as he has been known, is well, at least in this area, has got to be one of the most famous, iconic runners in our neck of the woods. Of course, obviously he came to prominence on the national stage as well. But Bill Rogers is our guy, right? Boston Billy.
Oh yeah. He actually, without giving too much away, he lives in Boxborough these days. And so he's a nice guy, and I know exactly. I used to run past his house all the time when I was working out in that area out in Littleton. So nice guy, is all about running, keeping healthy and everything else. And I'll see him at different events every now and then. Didn't happen to see him over the weekend. I don't know if he made it to the run show or not. It was a pretty big event. I got to meet Carl Lewis, which I went, wow, Carl Lewis is here. Okay, I got to say hello to this guy.
I saw that. Yes, I saw that. You had your picture taken with him, or maybe said more appropriately, Carl Lewis had his picture taken with you.
Yeah.
Right. Speaking of celebrity sightings, I'm sure Carl Lewis is telling that story. So you of anybody that I know, in fact, you have more experience at the Boston Marathon than anybody I know. Share with the listener, Scott, if you will, some pearls of wisdom. What are some things that you've learned over the years about the Boston Marathon that if a first timer came up to you and said, Mr. Graham, I'm going to be running the Boston Marathon this April, my first time. I know you've run it 36 consecutive years. What do I need to know? What are you, Scott, sharing with a first-time Boston Marathoner?
Go out as slow as you possibly can. Do not get pulled into someone else's race. The first 10 miles should feel like a jog to you. Something that you say, you would think it's ridiculously slow. If you think you're going to run let's say a 4-hour marathon, you should be going out at a speed that probably feels like a 5-hour marathon. Just take it easy. There's no reason to go out hard. Save yourself, because as we've discussed, you're going to end up running some hills, and those hills will tear you apart. And even the downhills, especially at the start, that steep downhill right away, I mean, you could do damage to yourself immediately there. And one thing people don't realize is when you first start working out or, running a race, your heart rate will jump, and it'll jump to, let's say it jumps up to, let's say 180 right away. Guess what? You're stuck at that rate for the whole race. You're better off having it jump to 150 and keeping it there than that 180 pace, because 180 is going to really hurt, 16 plus miles into the race. You're better off at a lower heart rate. And as you know, it's better for you in the long run.
Yeah. And people, of course, Heartbreak Hill gets all of the publicity. But the reality is the hilly part of the course starts before that. So what can a first timer expect outside of Heartbreak Hill, of course, again, which gets all the publicity, but what folks shouldn't be lulled into a false sense of security that the only hill is Heartbreak Hill, right?
Right, because the course is it's a roller coaster. It really goes all over the place. You start off downhill. but it does these undulating things all through the course, and nothing serious. It just, body blows, and it just wears on you. And you're coming down mile 15 and a half, like we discussed earlier, down the Wellesley Hill, and people get once again get all fired up, going, "Let's fly down this hill." Worst thing you can do, because at mile 16, you're going to start really getting the hills again, and it's going to just blow you apart. You want to feel strong at mile 16. If you feel strong at 16, you're going to be good to go, because none of the hills are all that hard, given, them themselves. I mean, Heartbreak Hill is probably a half mile long. So if you're in good shape, 3-4 minutes, that's all it is. It's not too bad, but it's a very bad point in the course.
Right. Well, and it's always a matter of there's the sort of accumulated effect of, right, to your point, the first 10K plus that's downhill if you've gone out too hard, the rolling, undulating hills, particularly the downhills, if you're letting it fly early on going downhill, all of those things accumulate,
right?
Such that by the time you get to Heartbreak Hill, what would ordinarily on a training run be no big deal is sometimes it feels like Mount Everest at that point.
Oh yeah. I mean, they used to have a race called the Heartbreak Hill Road Race. It was a 10K. And it was the first time I ran that hill. And I remember running it going, what the heck's the big deal? I don't get it. I hadn't run a marathon at that point.
Yeah, and right, and specifically, you hadn't run the Boston Marathon before.
Right.
So, all right. So, as a first timer, how do I know that a finish is in the bag? Is it when I see the Citgo sign?
Yeah, I would say that's pretty much. I mean, you've gone that far. You're seeing the Citgo sign probably around mile 22, 23 time frame, so you can see it from quite a ways out. And nothing's a guarantee. I've seen people pass out 100 yards from the finish line. I had a friend who he was running a 2:20 and he passed out when he turned onto Boylston Street.
Wow.
His body just shut down. Dave Dunham has never not finished, but he's ended up in the hospital. I mean, so it's never a given. You've got to get all the way to the finish line. And
yes.
And there's certain areas of the course. It's kind of funny. What is it? Coolidge Corner. There's a bunch of train tracks you got to run over. Those train tracks are deadly because you're changing your stride. And all of a sudden you're changing your stride, cramping happens real fast. It sneaks up on you like, what just happened to me? How come my legs are all locking up here? And it's just, you got to be careful. Even in Framingham, there's some train tracks you got to cross, and you got to make sure you're not changing your stride.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because Boston is a really old city, and while it's obvious it's a road race. These are on some fairly old roads, which include train tracks that you have to negotiate. Okay, so as a first time finisher, I crossed the finish line. They put the medal around my neck. They put the baked potato wrapper on me. What am I doing, or what should I be doing as soon as I cross the finish line? What have you learned over the years? What is your what's your procedure? What's your protocol? What would you advise a first timer do when they finish the Boston Marathon?
Get your picture taken. They have a marathon photo in there. Get that. Grab the salty snacks they have. Get some water. Resist the urge to take a medical chair. One of the wheelchairs. I mean, personally, just absorb what you've accomplished. One thing you should do too, before you hit the finish line, listen for your name being called, because they're actually calling them out. There's a lot of times they set up the readers out on the street, sometimes on the far left-hand side. Go and run across that, one reader that's, 50 yards from the finish line, so you hear your name called out. So these are little tricks and tips. When I usually finish, I do all those things, get my picture taken. I usually don't grab the snacks anymore because Greater Lowell always has all that at the thing. My thing is I try and get out of there as quickly as possible. I try not to stop running. I try to keep moving because as soon as you stop moving, you're going to lock up more than likely. So I hustle out and get out now. There's also one other key thing. They have you do a drop bag, or you can do a drop bag before you get on the buses early in the morning. So you got clothes to wear. I never do that because I found that, well, first of all I need to do is get to the Park Plaza Hotel. Great. But sometimes those buses back up where there's a line to get your drop bag. So not only are you're cold and you're waiting 15 minutes to get your drop bag. Now it might not be that long. You may be one of the early finishers and you're able to get your bag and get out of there quick. That's great. But if you're back in the hordes, it may take you a while to get that drop bag. And there's a lot of people in the finish area. If you can, have somebody meet you at the family meeting area with your clothes, because you can get out of there quickly, get to the family meeting area on St. James Street, right down by Arlington Street, get your clothes and get out of that area quickly. Or if you have a hotel in the area, don't bother with the drop bag, just go straight to your hotel. Avoid that because it can be tough.
Yeah. I mean, those are amazing pieces of advice. Well, let's finish today with a part of the program I like to call 3 random questions.
Okay.
Right? Now I provided you with some questions in advance of the show, just to give you an idea of some of the things that I was going to be asking you, but I did not provide you with the next 3 questions. Can you confirm that?
Yeah, I will confirm it. Now you got me nervous.
Okay, nothing to be nervous about. This is one of my favorite parts of the program. Okay, so 3 random questions for Scott Graham. Scott, here we go. Random question number 1. How did the nickname Fat, P-H-A-T, pain, heavy at times, originate?
There was a group of friends I have, Joe Carner, Keith Spinney, and Ken Rousseau. We used to all run together a lot, and we all belonged to different clubs and stuff, but we worked together. And it was just a group thing where, what's the forecast for today's run? Pain, heavy at times. And I just took it on sometimes as my thing, because it was just, especially when it came to snowshoe running, that was always the forecast.
Well, I will add that not only snowshoe running, but the Mount Washington Road Race for you as well. Your blog that I alluded to earlier, Run Scotty Run, I think was
Run Scotty G Run, yeah.
Run Scotty G Run. That was the blog that you maintained for a number of years. The photo on that blog with the nickname PHAT, pain heavy at times, is you in a white acidotic racing singlet. And I believe that photo is from a Mount Washington Road Race. And the expression on your face epitomizes the nickname pain heavy at times. Do you remember that day?
Oh, sure do. That was a Scott Mason photo, nonetheless.
Yes, it was.
And I remember that day. Well, those 3 guys I mentioned, they were in that race, and we had internal bets and stuff as to who was going to win. And some of them had taken off fast, and I was in good shape back then. That was probably 2010, 2011 race, and I had just come off Ironman training. So I remember that race like it was yesterday. That was the 5-mile section where it used to be dirt. And I remember seeing Scott up there, and I was just in so much pain. It just, as nobody runs that whole race. It's rare that anybody runs every step of the race, and it just tears you apart. It's the race that hurts the most, but you recover within minutes.
It's so true, right? Yeah, unlike your first Boston Marathon experience, in which you had to take several days off from work following it, the Mount Washington Road Race, 7.7 miles up the auto road to the summit of Mount Washington, only one hill as they describe, because it is just an uphill race. Literally the next day you could go out and go for a run, like virtually no soreness. It's funny that you mentioned that virtually nobody runs the entire thing. Of course, we both know that probably the top 10, top 15 men and women run every step of that 7.7 mile auto road. My one and only claim to fame, if it's even a claim to fame, is that the first year that I ran the Mount Washington Road Race, I ran every step of the race. Now, I didn't run it fast, but I didn't walk. Now, the reason I didn't walk was because I had learned a month or two earlier, when I found out I got into the race and had the discussion with my dad, who had also run the race, but back in the 1970s. And my dad, of course, had to tell me what the family record was at the Mount Washington Road Race. And of course, he also mentioned that he ran most of it. He said he had to walk some of it. So of course, I was inspired to run the entirety of the Mount Washington Auto Road, simply to outdo my old man. Well, random question number 2 is I think is going to be a fun one for you to answer. I know, because I follow you on social media, that you have a fairly sophisticated recovery protocol for these long, arduous events that you do, and it's a recovery protocol that I admire, even though I don't follow myself, but it and clearly it seems to work for you. So my random question number 2 for you is, what's your go-to flavor of ice cream following a long, arduous race?
Mocha chip.
Okay. So tell the listener the story of what is it about ice cream that's like it's your secret weapon, so to speak.
Yeah, it's my guilty pleasure. Years ago, I used to buy it in the ice cream in 3-gallon containers from a local ice cream stand, Sully's in Chelmsford, and Sullivan Farm now in Tingsboro. But the owners of those places, Ricky and Bob Sullivan, are runners too, so they would sell it to me for a very, a good price, we'll just say, and I'd go through a 3-gallon bucket of ice cream every week. Just me. And so that's my guilty pleasure. I don't, drink alcohol. I don't, I don't smoke. That's my guilty pleasure. And it works for me.
Oh, clearly it's worked for you. All right. So quick follow-up question. You do summer, I believe, in the Lakes region of New Hampshire. And I don't know if you know this or not, but at one point, the state of New Hampshire, per capita, had the highest ice cream consumption rate in the United States. So here in New Hampshire, ice cream is a thing for us. And of course, summertime, well, I mean, any time is a good time to have a bowl of ice cream, right? But the summertime typically is associated with ice cream. You spend the summers in the Lakes region of New Hampshire. Where's your go-to ice cream place in the summertime?
Yep. Papa Beans is the name of the place. It's on Wing Road in Sandwich. It's actually out of a maple place, where they make maple syrup. This woman, Ashley Bennis, is a friend of mine. In fact, I was running up Bald Knob yesterday with her, with our dogs, and she makes homemade ice cream. Her father used to make ice cream for sale too, and so that's where I get a lot of my ice cream these days. I like the family-owned type places, and I buy some grocery store stuff every now and then, but I like the more intimate places where you get specialized flavors and they're using a higher fat content cream and everything else.
Yeah. So for the listeners, Sandwich, New Hampshire, is it's it's a little bit out of the way, right? To say the least. It's kind of tucked into almost smack dab middle of the state of New Hampshire, and you gotta you gotta purposefully be going there in order to get there. But that ice cream shop, Papa Bean, it's a New Hampshire icon. It is I mean, there very well may be a handful of reasons to go to Sandwich, New Hampshire, but on the top of that list is that ice cream shop. So so for any listener that ever finds themselves in the state of New Hampshire, in the summertime in particular, make a trip to Sandwich, New Hampshire. Of anyone that's ever been there, nobody ever leaves disappointed. Safe to say?
Oh, absolutely. And it's one of those places too. It's an honor system deal where you go in and you leave cash or you Venmo the people, and they just, it's just nice that people do that, and it's a great place.
Okay, last random question. Always one of my favorite questions to ask. So Scott, you're going to host a group run, and you can invite 3 VIPs. Now, assume that all VIPs are runners, even if you know them to be runners or not. Okay. Now, these guests may be known to you, or they may be people that you've never met. They can be real people, or they can be fictional, like cartoon characters or movie characters or characters from a book. They can be from the present, or they can be from any time in the past or future. They can even be you from the past or future. Scott, who are your 3 special guests?
Okay. Emilio Zotepec.
Okay, so he was a runner from the 1920s, 1930s.
30s, 40s time frame. He won the Olympic 5,000, 10,000, and marathon in one Olympic Games. It was the first marathon he had ever run, and he basically quit running when Russia took over his country, and said he would never run for the Russians because they were offering him a cushy thing, and he ended up working in the mines instead. So he would be definitely one person, because he basically trained in the winter months and trained in army boots, and carried his wife on his back, and he had some great things he was talking about. Reading some of his story, he'd do a lot of 100-yard dash type things, almost like Tabata workouts. And people ask him, "But you're training to run long. Why are you doing that?" He says, "Well, I already know how to run slow." He says, "I'm trying to train myself to run fast here." Awesome. So and they say he was a very social character, which, us running people tend to be very social, because you're always with other people and stuff. And that's what kind of drives a lot of us. So he'd be number 1 on my list. Number 2, I just like some people's personalities, and you just had this woman on, and you're releasing the podcast today, is Cara. Cara is just such a wonderful person. Cara Haas, such a nice person, always positive. Running goes in her family. Her dad, Richard, was a runner and still does run. So she's always a lot of fun to run with. Lastly, let's see. I've run with a lot of the, really good people, but Rogers comes to mind, or Joan Benoit, or maybe Steve Prefontaine would be an interesting character to run with, because he had a bad boy type attitude. So I'm kind of ranging. The 3 people are totally different in how they did things and what they were, but that'd be an interesting group of people to run with.
That would be a really popular group run to be invited to, right? If you put it out there on Facebook that you're hosting a group run, up in the Lakes region of New Hampshire, and these are your three special guests. Phenomenal. Scotty, thank you so much for sharing your story. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Chris. And we got to get together again sometime soon to go for a run.
Let's absolutely do that. Thanks again, Scott.
All right. Thank you.
Well, after 36 years of doing anything, you know that there would be some great stories to tell. Can you imagine running 100+ laps on a track? Well, without a doubt, the marathon distance commands a great deal of respect. But Scott's experience teaches us that anyone can do it with three important elements in place: desire, a training plan, and a support system, including family, friends, and a local running club. Well, once again, you've been listening to the Eat Half, Walk Double podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, please circle back to the homepage and click the follow or subscribe button to stay up to date with all the new content. And of course, if you really enjoyed the show, please consider sharing it with your friends. I'll be posting some supporting media on my Twitter account at Coach Chris J. Dunn and the show's Facebook page at Eat Half, Walk Double, so make sure to check that out. And lastly, remember, the secret to living well and longer is to eat half, walk double, laugh triple, and love without measure. Until next time.